Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 23 playthrough of the Colorado Rockies. We have recently completed our third regular season with the Rockies, and it was a good one. 97-65 record, which was good to win the NL West by 5 games over the Dodgers. And it was also good by 1 game over the Miami Marlins for the best record in all of baseball. So our Rockies will have home field advantage for as long as we are alive in these playoffs. And that is a pretty positive thing for this team. Because when you look at our team statistics, our winning percentage at home is over 100 points better than it was on the road. Based on our home record, we would have been a 106 win team instead of the 97 win team that we were in the regular season. When all was said and done, the offense remains excellent, scoring 962 runs. The pitching staff was better. 11th in runs allowed doesn't sound all that great, but you do need to keep in mind that we're playing half of our games in Colorado, where there are a insane number of runs scored and extra base hits and home runs. And that obviously also influences how good our offense is every year, because even our first year with the Rockies 2 seasons ago, when we only won 74 games, we still had one of the best offenses in all of baseball. Last year we moved up to 96 wins and a playoff team. And as I mentioned, this year 1 win better with 97 wins, once again a playoff team. And we've got home field advantage throughout the playoffs. So we will see how that goes. The one disappointing thing is that a few days ago, our number one starter, Dave Alvarado, came up with a sore elbow 17 pitches into his final start of the year. And you can see that that's expected to have a moderate impact on him for 3 weeks. So when you look at a 13-11 record and a 4.75 ERA, doesn't necessarily sound like all that big a loss. But he is definitely our ace. And you can see that 4.75 ERA is the second best on the team of people who actually had enough innings pitched to qualify for the ERA title. He's our ace. He's making $27 million a year. And he's also a right-hander. In our number one starter, we've had a number of guys in the 5 slot this year, none of whom have really stuck, who have been right-handed pitchers, but our 1, 2, and 3 starters now for the playoffs are going to be lefties. And then I guess it'll likely be Vinny Gutierrez if and when we need a 4th starter. But that is TBD as we get the playoff roster ultimately put together. So if we face a team that is filled with left-handed batters, probably not the end of the world. But did like that there was a little bit of balance with one of our top starters being a right-hander. Now the one right-hander that we end up having in our playoff rotation will likely be the weakest pitcher of the bunch. We will do a deep dive on all of the stats and all of the performances of this team, either at the end of this episode if we have an early exit from the playoffs, or in a subsequent episode if we have a long run in the playoffs. But a quick look at the team's primary roster shows how important some of the additions we made this past offseason were. Elijah Moore and Robbie Carrillo both hit over 300 with 52 and 44 homers and both over 120 ribbies. They were the 2 players that we made trades for to bring on board in the prime of their career last offseason. Gave up some good prospects to do it, but I think it was the right move. And then the rookie Bobby Perez, I would have to think he's going to be a extremely strong candidate for Rookie of the Year this year. 263 average, 42 homers, 120 ribbies. I believe he won NL Rookie of the Month twice. And you can see Jamel Cohen, who we may be moving on from after this year, hit 283, 33 homers. We got over 20 homers from our third baseman, center fielder, and our catcher, who we could be moving on from this year. And then Jordan Casares, who we picked up to be a utility man during the offseason, ended up taking over as our full-time shortstop and hit over 300 for us. He is more of a defense-first guy, but the fact that he was able to hit over 300 for us probably shows the value of cores in terms of generating offense, but also means there's a good chance we're going to want to bring him back next year to play shortstop for us again. Omar Jones, who we made a big trade for last offseason, he is a free agent after this year. 35 saves, 3.55 ERA, which was one of the best among any of our relievers. The only one better is the left-hander Victor Fields, who put up a 2.94 ERA. So overall, first in most of the offensive categories, and you can see middle of the pack or worse in a lot of the pitching categories, but some of that is by nature of the park that we play in. And if you're looking closely, you can see that we're going to be playing the division rival Dodgers in the NLDS, also in a familiar refrain from over the course of this season. We had the National League Batter of the Month with Elijah Moore in September, hit .337, 12 homers, scored 27 runs, drove in 24. And you may remember from our last episode that he also set the Major League record by hitting home runs in 9 consecutive games, eclipsing Dale Long, Don Mattingly, and Ken Griffey Jr. with those 9 games in a row. So outside of those 9 games, he actually probably didn't do all that much, but fortunately for us, he had that incredible streak, which propelled him to 52 home runs this year. And although we finished 5 games ahead of the Dodgers in the standings this year, it's definitely not going to be an easy series for us. You can see we were 6-13 against the Dodgers in this 2051 season. So although we won the division, they certainly had our number throughout the regular season. So it's going to be a real interesting series. We've got the best offense in the National League, 11th in runs against. They have the 3rd best offense in the National League, 6th in runs against. But the Colorado factor certainly shows in those numbers because although they were 3rd in the NL in runs scored, we outscored them by almost 200 runs this year. So a pretty sharp drop-off from the Coors-infused offense that we put out there 81 games a year. And honestly, the fact that we only allowed 70 more runs than them makes me think that our pitching's not all that bad. So we've got the home field advantage, and we did not put Alvarado onto the playoff roster for this series. We decided just doesn't make sense to try to pitch a guy with a sore elbow that's going to have a moderate impact on his throwing. It just seems like that's asking for trouble, either in terms of a poor pitching performance, turning it into a injury that keeps him out for a whole season, or possibly some combination of the above. So we're going to be running a little short in terms of our pitching staff, but we do have our 20-game winner, Javi Toledo, on the mound. Joined us as a free agent this past offseason, was our one big free agent acquisition, and he went 20-8 with a 4.93 ERA. Going to be going up against Julian Givens, a youngster, only 25 years old, and he looks like he's going to be a good one. 18-10 this year with a 3.49 ERA. Really good stuff, really good movement, pretty good control. And 3 excellent pitches with that fastball, cutter, and slider. He's durable. He's a guy who somehow slipped to the 2nd round in 2048. But he looks like he's going to be a real good one for the Dodgers for years to come. So going to be a challenge for us to score some runs on him and the Dodgers here in Game 1. And it definitely was a challenge. They beat us 2-1. Not really the type of box score that you're going to expect to see in a game in Colorado, but the pitchers had the number. The Dodgers jumped out on us with runs in the 3rd and the 5th. We came back in the bottom of the 9th with 1 run, but it was too little too late. Looks like Alex Ortega, our 3rd baseman, drove in the 1 run for us, but it was absolutely a pitcher's duel. Givens scattered 5 hits and a walk over 7. Bethel came on for a 2-inning save. Toledo was good, 2 earned runs over 7 innings, and then Crawford and Fields with good relief. But this Rockies team is now quickly down 1-0 in this NLDS. You may remember a year ago we had home field advantage in the wild card series against a divisional rival, the San Francisco Giants, and they took us out in 2 straight games. So far, although we've made the playoffs in 2 of 3 years with the Rockies, and feel that we have built a team that is pretty effective in cores, particularly during the regular season. Our home record over the last 2 years in the playoffs is 0-3. So hopefully that changes today. We've got Juan Vargas on the mound, 16-5 with a 3.92 ERA this year. The 3.92 ERA by far the best of any of the pitchers on our staff. He's going to be going up against Chris Barnes, left-handed pitcher, was 10-9 with a 3.95 ERA. Certainly the 31-year-old doesn't look nearly as imposing as Givens did yesterday, and would think that this is going to be a game that Colorado's going to need to get. And unfortunately we don't. So we are now 0-2 in the playoffs this year at home after being 0-2 in the playoffs last year at home. 6-3 loss, gave up 4 home runs, it looks like, including 2 to Aguilera, who hit 1 the day before. We did get homers from Victor Gonzalez and Danny Ruiz, but the postseason for these Rockies is not going well. Once again, the Dodgers jumped on us early, got 2 runs in the third, did come back and tie it with runs in the third and the fourth, but they opened up the lead in the 7th. We got 1 back in the 8th, and then 2 runs in the 9th to clinch it for them. Got a couple of ribbies from Ruiz and 1 from Gonzalez, so it looks like all of our, not all of our offense, but most of our offense was generated by those 2 home runs. Vargas wasn't horrible. 3 earned runs over 4 2/3 innings. Obviously not great, but McLeod gave up a run in 3 innings of relief, and then Omar Jones in the 9th had our closer on, and he gave up 2 runs in that inning pitched. We were already down 4-3, but certainly didn't make matters easier for us in the bottom of the 9th, going down 6-3. So although we've built a pretty good regular season team with these Rockies, right now not showing very much in terms of our playoff performance. And we've got our backs against the wall now, going to need to win 3 in a row against a team that we are now 6-15 against this season. Jesus Galindo, 9-11 this year with a 5.41 ERA. One of the few non-ground ball focused pitchers on our team. May show up in the numbers a little bit, but the lefty is our number 3 starter at this point with the injury to Alvarado. Going up against Julio De La Cruz, who was 16-6 with a 3.08 ERA. Wow, the Dodgers with some good young pitching. He's 24 years old, just about to turn 25. So he is even younger than Givens, and Julio De La Cruz they picked up in the 3rd round back in 2045. So the Dodgers appear to have done a really nice job drafting some young pitchers over the last several years, and tough matchup for the Rockies. And it's all over. So that was ugly. And the Rockies, I'm glad in terms of this rebuild that we've got 2 playoff appearances in 3 seasons of the rebuild, but I'm pretty frustrated that in those 2 playoff appearances, this team is now 0-5 in the playoffs and 0-4 in Colorado. At least this loss to clinch the sweep for the Rockies at least happened on the road, but 8-1 loss. Did get a homer, obviously a solo shot in our only run from our shortstop, Jordan Casares. But once again, after a few scoreless innings to start, the Dodgers in the bottom of the 4th put a 5 spot up, and they took a 6-0 lead into the 7th inning. And obviously, we were never close. So disappointing end to the season. Galindo was not good. He is going to be arbitration eligible. His number is going to be about $10.5 million. Face a bit of a decision with him. He's an important part of our rotation, but he hasn't been incredibly effective in Colorado thus far. McLeod in relief gave up a couple hits but no runs. Ethan Mingo gave up a run on no hits and 3 walks. Looks like there was likely an error involved. And then Will Lucio gave up a couple of runs when the game was pretty much out of control. So extremely disappointing, to say the least, that despite having the best record in baseball and despite having home field advantage for as long as we were in the playoffs, the Rockies season is over as quickly as it mathematically possibly could be, with a 3-0 sweep at the hands of our division rival, Los Angeles Dodgers. So the season is over for our Rockies. So that'll give us an opportunity in this episode to dig into the stats a little bit on the season and start planning for the off season and who will be back and who will not be back. Just mentioned Jesus Galindo. He has not been incredibly effective since we picked him up. He has been a consistent starter for us. The question is whether we can afford to be spending $10.5 million on him next year as he's arbitration eligible. We'll find out more once the postseason is over and a World Series champion has been crowned as to what our budget's going to look like next year. Our ownership is generous financially, and I think we're going to have a real good financial performance this season, but they're more focused on winning than anything else. And the best regular season record in baseball is a positive thing as far as that winning perspective, but getting bounced 3-0 in the NLDS is not great as far as winning, because ultimately winning is about a World Series, and we've failed in our goal to do that. So will be interesting to see how the win now attitude and good finances with a generous owner all plays out in terms of our budget for next year. And that could be a big determinant of whether Jesus Galindo and several of these other players are going to be back with us next year. Vinny Gutierrez did end up starting some games for us at the end of the year. He is another guy who is going to be a free agent this offseason. We'll have to make a big decision on him. Right now he's only looking for $2.8 million a year, so I think it's likely that we will bring him back to be a reliever for us and a potential starter. Javi Toledo, big free agent that we picked up, already talked about him, led the National League with 20 wins. He is going to be back with us on a pretty big number next year. We did front load the contract a bit, $24 million this past year, this past year. The season is over now for us, and then $18 million for the next 3 years with a team option at the end of it. So Toledo will be back, and Juan Vargas certainly will be back after a 16-5, .392 season. We've got a team option for him for $6 million next year. So certainly feel pretty confident that we will have Javi Toledo, Juan Vargas, the 2 left-handers, as well as our erstwhile ace, Dave Alvarado, back as hopefully our top 3 starters next year. I guess actually the hope is that they're not our top 3 starters. Our hope is that there are second, third, and fourth starters, and we somehow find a way to add a true ace to the team above them. But Gutierrez probably back. Galindo, who knows? Toledo, Vargas, and Alvarado will be back. Tyrone Colbert, 3-5 record, 5 saves, 4.07 ERA over 66 and a third innings pitched. He's a guy who wants to be a starter. He's also headed to free agency, and he's been looking for pretty decent money. He had $12.9 million a year, so he's going to end up being in the same bucket as Jesus Galindo. There's a few guys who are looking for 10, 11, 12 million dollars. We're probably not going to be able to bring them all back. Chase Crawford was 8-5, 6 saves, 5.28 ERA, kind of all over the map. Started 16 games, obviously was closing games for us at times. We have him signed for a few years at a pretty modest amount, so Crawford will be back next year. Victor Fields, the left-hander, Going to be getting a big bump in arbitration from 1.7 million to close to 7 million potentially. He was 4-0 with a 2.94 ERA over 107 innings since we picked him up in a trade with Philly about a year ago. Thought that he would fit in very well as a left-hander in Colorado. Close to $7 million a year is getting expensive for a reliever, but he is a guy who does have the skill set to start if we need him to. We never tried this year because we were so left-handed heavy in the rotation. Felt like there was more value with him being in the bullpen, but particularly if we move on from Jesus Galindo, that could open up a number 4 or 5 hole in the rotation for Victor Fields. Will Lucio, young guy, going to be still making the minimum next year. Split time between AAA and the majors this year kind of was the odd man out because he did have option years and he still will have option years next year. Think he is definitely a part of our future and probably will be on the roster all of next year since we're going to be moving on from several of these pitchers most likely. Darius McLeod, guy that we picked up in a trade with St. Louis right before the trade deadline, was 3-0 with a 4.38 ERA after he came over. Another guy who is headed to free agency. Guessing, since he wants to be a starter, I'm guessing his number is going to be a lot more than we would pay. Actually, no, not looking for all that much. So $2 million a year. So it's kind of interesting. Of the prospective free agents, Gutierrez and McLeod, not looking for much money. Colbert as a potential free agent and Galindo into arbitration, both looking for pretty serious money. Ethan Mingo is a guy that we have signed for another couple years, so he will likely be back. 6-3 record, a couple of saves, ERA just over 4 and 87 in the third innings. Did not start any games for us this year, but is capable of it. Certainly a valuable arm for us and a guy who was an all-star for us last season. Latrell Young, left-hander who we picked up in a trade with the Mets about a year and a half ago, has really been a left-handed specialist for us, not pitching a ton of innings, and we do have him back potentially next year at a pretty low contract, so think he will likely be back. Hopefully our manager can figure out a way to get a little more out of him. And then Omar Jones, who we picked up in a trade with the Braves, 10-7 record, 35 saves, honestly a 3.55 ERA in 76 innings, with a lot of that action being in Colorado, is not a bad season. Popular with the fans, has a good profile for us. The issue is, last time I checked in, he was looking for about $25 million a year for an extension, and he's still looking at about $25 million a year for 4 years for an extension. So I think in the most likely scenario, we will make a qualifying offer to Mr. Jones. If he's willing to come back for 1 year at $18.9 million, we would do it. But more likely we'll be getting some draft pick compensation with him. So 3 big decisions among the pitching staff in this offseason as far as the qualifying offer for Jones, and then Colbert looking for a pretty good chunk of money as a free agent, and Galindo with a pretty good chunk of money in arbitration are the most interesting decisions that we're going to need to focus on in the coming weeks once the season is over. And moving on to our offensive players as we start to plan out the offseason and review what happened during the regular season. Victor Gonzalez is a guy that we picked up right when we took over this team in 2048. He's been our starting catcher ever since, although you can see he's been banged up the last couple years and missed some time, but still hit over 20 home runs each year, above average OPS pluses each season. He won a Silver Slugger for us in 2050, and he was an All-Star for us in 2049 and 2051. So he's been pretty well decorated. The issue is he's going to be 34 by the time next season starts. He's now only an average defensive catcher, and he's looking for $13 million a year. So right before the trade deadline, we traded away his backup and some prospects to bring Alex Alvarez on board. Alvarez is a excellent defensive catcher, also popular with the fans, and he has a little pop in his bat. And he did hit 281 with 9 homers and 160 at-bats ever since he came over to Colorado. He's also an Iron Man, and we've got him signed for the next several seasons, and Detroit kept a good chunk of his contract. So I had brought Alvarez over thinking at the very least he would be a great backup to have. Honestly, with his excellent glove and the way that he did hit for us after he came over, and I admit a lot of this is probably due to Colorado, but I think it's very conceivable that Alex Alvarez ends up being our starting catcher next year, which should be good for the pitching staff, and we're probably going to move on from Victor Gonzalez and thank him for his years of service, but likely put that money somewhere else. First base DH for 3 years for us, and for long before that, before we took over the Rockies. Jamel Cohen hit 283 this year with 33 homers. Popular with the fans. Obviously, the bat is still very good. Put up a 3.6 WAR this year. Concern with him, he's about to turn 33 years old. He's fragile in terms of his injury proneness, and we've got team options on him each of the next 2 seasons, $18 million this coming year and $20 million in 2053. So we're going to have to see what the financial situation looks like when we get to the end of the season. If we've got tons of money to spend and the free agent class looks kind of weak, Jamel Cohen could be back because he's still a very productive bat. If money looks like it's going to be tight and or there are a lot of real compelling free agents out there, then it might be time to move on from him. And part of the reason we may be able to move on from him is that we picked up Adam Fields in the Rule 5 draft this past year. He's about to turn 23 years old. He's durable in terms of his injury proneness. His batting profile looks pretty interesting compared to Jamel Cohen's. He's horrible defensively. He has no speed. But he did hit 280 for us this year in 157 at-bats. We were able to keep him on the roster all year. A little concerned that he only had 4 homers in those 157 at-bats, although he did have 16 doubles, so he at least generated some good extra base power. But he would be a very cost-effective person for us to have on the roster if money is a little tighter. And it's very conceivable that he could put up, I don't want to say the same numbers as Cohen, but he could put up maybe 90% of what Cohen did for about 6 or 7% of what we'd be paying Cohen next year, which may be a good trade for us. Another reason we may be able to move on from Cohen is that we've got Elijah Moore, who can play first base, corner, outfield, and DH for us. All he did this year was hit .310, 52 homers, 129 ribbies, 150 OPS plus, 167 WRC plus, 5.8 WAR. A very dynamic offensive player. The only issue with him is that he's arbitration eligible. When we picked him up in the trade with Seattle last November, his arbitration number was expected to be about $14 million. So you can see he's made himself over $7 million through the great performance that he had this season. Clearly, though, we would rather be paying the young and ascending Elijah Moore $21 million than paying Jamel Cohen $18 million next year. So it would be great if we could have them both back, but if it's only one, it's going to be the durable 27-year-old with the captain personality coming off of a potential MVP-type season rather than the fragile 33-year-old who was still very productive. One player we'll definitely be moving on from is Juan Castillo. This is a guy that we had in Pittsburgh, and we traded for him when we took over in Colorado. He was our starting shortstop the first year with us, starting second baseman last year when he won a Gold Glove. And he was more of a utility guy this year, hit just .245. He has a $18 million team option for next year. Clearly, we will not be picking that up. So, Mr. Castillo, we thank you for your years with us. I guess it's possible if his demand is a fraction of that $18 million that we could have him back next year as a utility infielder, but would expect that he's going to look to test the free agent market. Danny Ruiz is a guy who took over at second base for Castillo for much of this season. Ended up hitting 299, 10 homers, and 341 at-bats. Has been kind of a super utility guy for us the last couple of years. You can see played 108 games a year ago, 103 this year. Pretty solid defensively, able to play a ton of different positions. Arbitration number closing in on $7 million. Think that we will likely have him back. The reason Ruiz didn't start for us all the time at second base is that we ended up moving Rogelio Terrazas, who was our shortstop last year, to second base this year, feeling that he had a little bit better of a bat than Ruiz and a little bit better glove. Hit 266, 49 doubles, 12 triples, 15 home runs. Thank you, Coors. And scored over 100 runs for us. So he is another guy whose numbers are getting a little higher, also expected to make about $7 million next year, but we tend to think that we would probably want to have Ruiz and Terrazas back. Alex Ortega, another guy who's going to be back, and fortunately for us, he's still going to be at the major league minimum for one final time last year. Guy that came up in the middle of our first season with the Rockies in 2049, had a bit of a down year compared to last season this year, but still hit 250 with 24 doubles, 27 home runs. But his OPS plus and his WRC plus were a little below league average. Although he's a solid defensive third baseman, his WAR was cut in half. But would still think, as a player making the minimum, he is a pretty compelling guy to keep on the roster for next season. And then Jordan Casares, who we picked up, wondering what his bat was going to be as a free agent. But we knew that he would have a great glove and thought that he could be a super utility guy for us. When we got off to a slow start and Terrazas was just not delivering the defense we wanted at shortstop, we decided to plug Casares in as our starting shortstop against right-handed hitters, and he responded well, hitting 317 and over 400 at-bats. Not much power, but with that glove, if he's anywhere near a league average player in terms of his OPS plus and his WRC plus, going to be a very valuable player. Put up a 4.1 WAR for us this year. He's arbitration eligible. Surprise, surprise, another guy going to be making about $7 million next year. Would think that $7 million-ish for him, Terrazas and Ruiz, that is most of our infield right there. You know, with Ortega at third base, that gives us 3 starters and 1 guy to play a utility role. So think that all of them are likely to be back, even though their salary costs are all going up, as they should be. Robbie Carrillo is a guy who his salary is also going up, but fortunately we are at least locked in with him. We know what we'll be paying. It's going to bounce pretty significantly by $10 million next year to $22 million, and then he'll be making over $34 million for the third and fourth years that he's going to be in Colorado. Fortunately, we were able to get the Cardinals to retain 25% of his contract when we picked him up in a trade around Thanksgiving last year. Clearly a very expensive player, but he was an excellent left fielder for us this year. Led the National League in runs, hits, and triples. Hit 344, finished second in the NL batting race. OPS of almost 1.1. Just a brilliant season for him with an 8.4 WAR. He's expensive, especially beginning next year, but a guy that obviously, along with Moore, came up this year to our team through those trades and really helped take our offense to another level. Yoshitaro Nakahara, veteran left fielder, wrecked physically, moved into a pinch hitter, 4th or 5th outfielder type of role for us this year and was relatively productive, hit 268 with 8 homers and 21 ribbies and 112 at-bats. We do have a team option for him next year at $1.5 million. I think the question is just with him now 38 years old and wrecked physically, do we want to get a little younger, even though his bat is still productive when he is in the lineup? Tony Padilla, starting center fielder, really kind of dropped off compared to last year when he hit over 300 with 33 homers and 87 ribbies. Batting average dipped by 60 points this year. Home runs down to 26. Still drove in almost as many runs and scored almost as many, but his OPS plus was almost slashed in half from that brilliant 2050. And you can see his WAR went from 6.3 down to 1.6. He is a guy who, surprise, surprise, going to be making about $7 million in arbitration. We see a common theme here. At some point, we're not going to be able to hold on to all of these guys who are in kind of their fourth, fifth, sixth seasons. But right now, the numbers aren't so excessive that we have to move on from all of them. So going to have some interesting decisions to make, but I tend to think Padilla will be back. Last but not least, Bobby Perez, the rookie, still listed as the number 59 prospect in baseball, but he is a major leaguer at this point. We brought him up at the end of last year, and he hit well. 263 this year, 42 homers, 120 ribbies, 114 OPS plus, 126 WRC plus, and a 5.0 WAR. Pretty solid defensively also for a right fielder. Really like our defensive defense with Carrillo, Padilla, and Perez across from left to center to right. The big knock on him is the 222 strikeouts, but he was still pretty productive despite striking out a lot, and he's a guy who's going to be making the major league minimum next year. So certainly expect that Bobby Perez will also be back with the Rockies in 2052. And we made it to the World Series where the Marlins, who were the second best team in the National League behind us, took advantage of their home field advantage in their first round bye to make it into the playoffs. And they're going to be going up against the Red Sox, who I believe may have had the best record in the American League. Yeah, so best record in the AL against the second best record in the National League in the 2051 World Series. We did make one offer to one of our pending free agents. Darius McLeod was looking for about $2 million a year. He was reasonably successful after we brought him over. Think that as a right-handed arm out of the bullpen, $2 million a year is not unreasonable for a durable guy who's an extreme ground baller, still has good movement on his pitches. So we're going to try to bring him back. We did also try to bring Vinny Gutierrez back, but he was insistent on being a starting pitcher, and we've ended up angering him so much by not guaranteeing him that role that he's broken off negotiations with us. We still probably have close to a month before free agency where we can potentially try to re-engage with him if need be, but could be moving on from Vinny this offseason. And we did get Darius McLeod signed to that extension. The fans pleased with that, so that gives us a small bump to fan interest, but it has been deteriorating over the second half of the season, which is a little surprising given that we ended up with the best record in baseball and we were selling out most of our games over the last two-thirds of the year, but it is what it is. And the Boston Red Sox are your 2051 World Series champions. And they're building themselves a little bit of a dynasty. If you watched our Pittsburgh Pirates series, you may remember that in 2047 and 2048, our final 2 years as general manager of the Pittsburgh Pirates, we made it to the World Series and lost to the Red Sox. And now here, 3 years later, the Red Sox have another World Series championship. So 3 and 5 years for the Boston Red Sox. They went up 3-0 in the series. The Marlins came charging back to win the next 3. And I'm not going to lie to you, even though this is just a imaginary virtual 2051, I was definitely rooting as a Yankees fan for the Marlins to topple them and come back from a 3-0 deficit to give some tiny measure of cosmic revenge over what had happened in 2004. But that was not to be the case, and the Red Sox are your champions. And now it's time to dig in and see what our money may be looking like next season, and a lot of option year decisions ahead of us, as we've talked about. We'll look at some of the less interesting stuff first. Some posted players from South Africa. Arbitration beginning, off-season beginning, top prospects. Elijah Smith, who we picked third in the draft a year and a half ago, is viewed as the number 8 prospect in all of baseball, so really happy to have him on board. Ended up splitting this year between rookie ball and A ball, and did a pretty solid job, especially when he got up to A ball, going 6-3 with a 3.56 ERA, 73 strikeouts, and 68 and a third innings pitched. So Juan Castillo, option year decision of $18 million. We are going to avoid that last contract year. Thank you, Juan, for playing with us. If we can get you back for a lot less money, we will do so. Yoshitaro Nakahara, $1.5 million. We're going to think about that a little bit. Not that it's a huge sum of money, but if we think we've got young guys who can take over for him, probably doesn't make sense to have a 38, I believe, going on 39-year-old occupying a roster spot, especially because he's wrecked physically. Jamel Cohen, $18 million with a $2 million buyout. We're going to be really interested in seeing what this new budget looks like momentarily, and that's going to help tell us whether or not Cohen might be coming back. Juan Vargas, 22-game winner last year, 16-game winner this year, has been one of our top starters since we brought him to the team. $6 million team option. Yes, please, we will bring Mr. Vargas back next year. So Vargas will be back. Castillo only going to be back if he takes a huge pay cut. We declined that option. Still got to figure out what to do with Nakahara and Cohen. Review our season goals. Told us to win it all. Happy that we made a strong push for it. Seen some progress with our attendance. Wants us to get a championship. Very happy with our performance in accomplishing goals. Happy with our performance overall. Would like to see more from the team. Want to win a championship next year. Improve our defensive efficiency. Keep increasing attendance. So it sounds like he's reasonably pleased with what we did. And again, I think the financial situation for the team this year is going to look really good. I'm not going to jump over to that screen quite yet because that would also tell me where our budget went. And I'd rather do it in an email. I don't know why. All right, so that's good. $288 million budget. So he gave us a $38 million bump. As I said, we did well financially this year, and we also did pretty well on the field with the best record in baseball, even though we kind of choked a bit in the playoffs. But that is a nice bump to the budget. So that's going to put us in a position where can see we've got about $34 million to spend right now on free agents, and that is still assuming that we exercise the option on Cohen. We've got to figure out what to do arbitration-wise with Galindo. Elijah Moore we're obviously going to bring back, and then Tarazis, Padilla, Danny Ruiz, Rodas, Victor Fields, Jordan Casares. Got a lot of arbitration decisions for guys making decent amounts of money. So it's going to be some interesting decisions for this offseason for us. The key one is obviously what to do with Jamel Cohen, because that would open up another $18 million for us if we move on from him, which would push us up to having about $50 million plus to spend on free agents. And that's assuming we don't decide to cut back scouting and development to go after somebody. So it's going to be an interesting offseason. We'll take a quick look at who the potential free agents might be. Rogelio Loera, pitcher that we've made offers to over the years, one of the great pitchers in baseball history, going to be looking for about $36 million. Even at the age of 39, that stuff, that movement the changeup, the splitter, the cutter are all still just incredible. And those ground ball tendencies would play very well in Colorado. It would give us another lefty, though. But we could potentially afford him, and given that we are a much better team than we were when we tried to make an offer for him 2 years ago, I think there's a chance he would come and try to win a World Series with us in his, I assume, his final season. The numbers he has put up over the course of his career are just insane. He will get his 6,000th strikeout next year, God willing. And he's pitched only a little over 3,700 innings. So just an incredible career. 128.6 WAR. Has led the American League in pitcher WAR each of the last 2 seasons at age 37 and 38. So he is clearly going to be a big prize of the class. You can see a few closers out there, including our closer, Omar Jones. Doesn't look like, and a lot of familiar names from our days with Pittsburgh, with Bobby Astorga, Juan Bin Daoud, Edward Flores, Greg Gaylord. I have no doubt we're going to be able to find a nice reliever. The question is, what is there in terms of starters? And clearly, Loera is the class of who is out there. He's going to be very tempting because I do feel like we are just a stud pitcher away. His injury proneness is normal at this point. I think at one point he was better than that. So clearly his body's probably starting to break down a little bit at this point. He will certainly be a temptation. Whether we can really make the numbers work is uncertain. Take a look at the top batters who may be available on the free agent market. Rich Gilbo, a guy who we were hoping, he was a number 1 overall pick back in 2042, and we looked at him when we were previewing that draft back when we were the Pirates, and we're just like, this guy is going to be a monster. And he certainly has. Look, at least 3 straight batting titles for him. 3 straight batting titles, and he's won 5 out of the last 6. And he's got a little power while he's doing it, too. So I was going to say he's a Rod Carew or Wade Boggs or Tony Gwynn type hitter, but with perhaps the exception of, I believe, 1987 with Mr. Boggs, when people were just hitting homers like crazy. He's a consistent batting title winner like those players, who also brings a lot of power to the plate, or a decent amount of power to the plate. So outfield isn't a huge need for us, and we certainly aren't going to spend $45 million on him, but certainly an interesting player that's out there. Drops off pretty quickly after him. Jordan Moomin, a nice bat, but we're pretty pleased with our outfield at this point. Jesus Alcocer, really nice glove in the outfield, has a lot of speed, but again, I don't feel like outfield is our big need. Danny Bonilla looks like he, along with our guy Victor Gonzalez, Adam Medrano, Bobby Rivera, going to be some of the top catchers out there. Bobby Rivera could be interesting. Like the glove a lot. He's also an Iron Man. We don't really need a catcher. Danny Bonilla, another good glove, decent bat, wrecked physically. There are some infielders. Castillo, you can see, who we're letting go from the $18 million, is supposed to be looking for about $8.5. So we could potentially get him back for significantly less, but that would still be a lot to pay for a utility infielder. So gonna have some decisions to make. The class, and obviously I will spend more time with this class before we begin our next episode and make any decisions, but the free agent class with Gilbo among the batters and Loera among the pitchers is extremely top-heavy, with one incredible starting pitcher and one incredible outfielder. But other than that, the classes look, I don't want to say mediocre, but fully valued and not necessarily game-changing talent, especially in what we think we're going to need. So we've got some interesting decisions to make in this offseason, and we're going to start working on making those decisions in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.